cities that are built explicitly as software and hardware platforms. Whenever I hear the term smart cities, I reflexively think of Jacques Tati's satires on the comic follies of modern architecture. But however dark the humor, for master-controlled megacities and the stale visions of command, mega hijinks are sure to follow. The poverty of the off-the-shelf strategy of such plans is punctuated by how actually important the intelligent composition of computational systems at urban scales and urban systems that are computational as a computational substrate actually are, especially as the basis of what we call platform sovereignty. Now, by contrast, Sanford Quinter's notion of the allegory of what he calls the digital Pleistocene links these supposedly futuristic technologies back to a primordial relationship with territory, and suggests that our meandering, rootless itinerary and itinerancy through the surpriseless pathways of junk space, gripping our mobile cloud platform tethers, aka phones and tablets and so on, scanning and sorting, poking and choosing as we go, is actually a far less modern way of being urban than we might assume. Humans as a species, of course, have evolved very little since we were in the last 100,000 years or so, and barely at all since the appearance of writing. Our body's sensory media are more or less the same as those that allowed our ancestors to survive the predatory rhythms of the primordial savanna. And as the city's landscapes of information production and reception pace similar rhythms, which now persist, now in perhaps some kind of triangulation with new communication channels and augmented cognition, perhaps we tune these rhythms so that they can now resonate with the new tools as much as we have tuned our tools to them. Quinter writes that, and I'll quote him, "The contemporary mediascape has given such primacy of place to communication that it has transformed it into substance itself, the very material of which we and our world are made. Yet, all biological substance is founded on signaling, from the first single-celled organisms nearly 3 billion years ago to the most sophisticated forms of human social life today. There is no family of animal that is not defined by its capacity for signaling, and no ecological niche that is not defined by the infrastructure that supports this signaling. When the human line broke off from its ape ancestors, it was the result of a new capacity for communication, a new hand-eye-brain-mouth machine, and the rise of a new signaling niche in the environment to be filled, that is, the long-distance savanna." So, architecture at landscape scale, whether understood as a continuous network of urban fabrics, I guess, or as a kind of withdrawn megastructure, both at landscape scale, has to be at least partially harmonious with these tunings and counter-tunings. The stack as a whole enrolls the city as a discrete layer through the binding of sensation and scale, of enclosure and envelope, and of the tactility of the virtual and the effervescence of the monumental. So, as a discrete subsection of this larger edifice, architecture serves as both a compositional model for stacks, and stacking as the tangible infrastructure for its own plural manifestation as cities. While it captures humans and tethers them within its walls, it also provides the boulevards of escape toward other urban interiors. And at least in this regard, the city layer of the stack does not enforce dichotomies between urbanisms of enclosure versus urbanisms of mobility. It's happened to stage both at once. One may turn into the other at any moment, enclosure or mobilization. Because the layer's basic building unit is the interfacial partition, a physical or virtual boundary that is made systematically reversible, as we talked about on the first day, the nomos of reversibility as our now normalized exception for the line. Is made systematically automatically reversible by the situation of its functions within this larger computational mechanism. It is essentially the role of the computational substrate to generate and transform the urban surface into an interfacial surface, which allows it to stage this normalized reversibility between enclosure and mobility. So as we'll see, it opens up closed-off urban spaces to different users in different ways, allowing different city morphologies for some than it does for others. And in doing so, generates and automates a kind of visceral first-person experiences of platform sovereignty, whether it's invited to or not. Okay. Let's go back to a sort of primal scene, if we like, in terms of what cities are, where they come from, that might identify this inversion and give it a historical ground of some sort. Along with policing partitions, cities design incursions around which roving bodies might orient the passing. So instead of just housing inert populations, the city is foremost a platform for sorting users in transit, who in turn resort the urban platform and through it resort one another. So in many respects, for stacked urbanism, mobilization precedes and supersedes settlement, which is, as we said in the first place, a counter to the normal way in which we understand the primordial city as a fortified settlement, agricultural settlement. But consider by way of analogy some excavations that began in 1994 that unearthed the Göbekli Tepe temple in Turkey, which is to date the oldest human-made place of worship ever found. It digs layers of strata one upon the other, stacked over centuries. The earliest layers dating to the very beginning of the Holocene era, 9,000 years before Common Era. Some foundations even earlier, staggering 7,000 years before the Great Pyramids, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 5,000 years before the first proto-states emerged in the Nile and Indus valleys. The temple predates not only formal agriculture, but wide-scale sedentary human settlement as a whole. It's thought that the temple was a site of worship for numerous hunter-gatherer groups who migrated around a 100-mile radius or so. So the discovery is obviously significant for Neolithic anthropology, but it's also challenged consensus around the social and technological capacities of pre-agricultural societies. And and for our purposes at least, it underscores the foundational role of theology in the centralization of symbolic interfacial authority, which we'll talk about tomorrow, as well as an advance of the proto-state, but also for its work as a kind of geography or earth writing, and one in which might foreground the mobility of the ways in which the markers in the landscape, the first initial incursions into the site that would orient space, is done for the orientation of a landscape for bodies in motion, persons in movement, such that we may, instead of thinking of settlement as the first order operation of the city and mobility through cities as this modern supplement or an exception to the norm, it's maybe in fact the inversion, that mobility through sites and across a symbolically rich landscape is first, settlement second. So we can imagine, perhaps naively for those following food and game, the direction of Göbekli Tepe may have been a kind of guiding vector around which unpredictable landscapes were measured. Its collection of animal images serves as perhaps an index of possible encounters. Its funeral rites as an interface to the mysteries of life and the imagined possibility of triumph over death. So for unknown reasons, around the beginning of the 8th millennium BCE, the entire temple system was deliberately buried under 500 cubic meters of soil. No one knows why, but preserving its discovery until the 1990s. Now, as said, the temple could perhaps allegorize this primordial geography of landscape, a kind of homing figure that oriented the movements of groups in motion by proximity, by distance, access, reference, and as an interface to the world through which they move. So then, zipping back to the present, the city layer may be seen not only as enveloping space into control fields, but also as a return to these elemental functions of passage, direction, narration. The modern urban surface is striated by regularized voids that provide self-directed passage from one enclosure to the next. We call some of these voids streets, some of these enclosures blocks, and call the generative platform striation the grid. The grid serves the dual purpose of both enclosure and escape, noted above. And once it subdivides urban space into geometric units, each one bound by legal and physical membranes, each one also situated on the shore of avenues of linear flight toward other cities over the horizon. The city layer then is defined by the lines which slide between acceleration and enclosure, both the congestion of physical objects and the data packets shuttled and throttled through glass wire and ambient electromagnetic fields. This urban interweaving of both grids, one literally concrete, the other more delicate, if no less heavy, binds the mysteries of our temples to the spatial interfaces that turn sites into place. And with these cloud tether devices in our hands pointing the way, apps in hand or in hand and at hand, we hunt for and find our own itineraries, gather food, tabulate risks, mark passage, manage personal economies of sovereignty and alterity, and make tribute to the cycles of synthetic time and governance that give shape to this landscape. So, it should be clear this sort of parabolic history, drama again rehearses, dramatizes an unwinding of this overly worn Schmittian distinction between the city bounded partition, of permanent centers, of envelope population, grounded life, and this other city, the eternal Rome, and this other city of movement, naval, glacious, expressed in nomadic landscapes, shifting perspectives, impermanent networks, the eternal Carthage. So in Schmidt's, the former is the Germanic, the latter the Anglo-Saxon. So for the other, as it is for Schmidt, the line is a fixing differentiation between inside and outside, a distinct boundary membrane that holds together this contiguous polity. And in doing so, it naturalizes that polity's lived experience of space. But just to underscore the point, any line is reversible. Any outside, also an inside, as demonstrated by this the story about the Bosnian Serb camp and whether the photographer was on the inside or the outside that I told you yesterday. These two urban careers of the line are themselves equally reversible. And for the grid, the line of absolute passage and the line of absolute partition both become in practice a means for the expression of the other. One becomes the other. It's the same system. Like that young girl, old girl optical illusion, they kind of flip the figured ground prominence of one or the other. You know, hat, duck, you know, these optical illusions. The figured ground prominence of one over the other, inside versus outside. And the grounded versus the mobile, as the grounded versus the mobile, flips between one ideal resolution and the other, oscillating wildly and permanently. And this is automated, once again, by the computational surface, the interface. That its immediate affordance can flip from one to the other. That you walk up to it, it's one thing. Alex walks up to it, it's another. I walk up to it, it's a third thing. It can actually, the same mechanism can actually oscillate as a filtering mechanism or as a capturing mechanism or mobilization mechanism on the fly. Okay. I'm going to skip this little discussion of no-stop city, which I'm going to skip because I think the point we've made, that it makes, I think we've already dealt with. Let me though speak to a little bit about the city's layer and how it sort of locates itself within the stack operation, particularly in terms of the way this differentiation of one user in relationship to another user, because this is the basis of what we'll call a platform sovereignty, and the difference between the way in which these two interfaces might address someone or something. So let me just go through it from the top. Now that humans are a majority urban species, it's perhaps time to reevaluate what real last instance sovereignties can be derived directly from urban systems, surfaces, and interfaces. And to do so would mean to situate the city as an interdependent layer within this larger stack armature, and to embed the management of urban networks within global information and energy clouds. Infrastructure produces the fragments from which platform sovereignty is identified, codified, and enforced across scale, from the interpersonal to the interfacial to the transcontinental. And we'll discuss how. So, in contrast to perspectives that locate the political within a discursive realm, transcendent the physical urban polis itself, platform sovereignties, on the other hand, emerge less through legislative birth canals than through the irregular but consistent access to public and private hardware. The layer itself, the city layer itself, is not encapsulated by legal boundaries, but is spread throughout what we could call a composite city, for which any one particular metropolis is but a localized instance of within the globalized economy of mobilization and partition. This composite is then built of many different cities, but also of the many different grids that coalesce into these urban scale platforms. Grids of optical networks for photon exchange, energy grids for electron exchange, concrete grids for object placement and displacement, which together link city clusters into the morphological and geographic hierarchies that we know and see, and as in many cases as a hub and spoke network topology. Any one grid, energy grid, street grid, information grid, might situate an actor, a user, agent, whatever, according to one particular kind of matrix, based on its own history, its own momentum, its own alliances, contradictions, and the overlapping of any two grids might work then to multiply those situations into a kind of incongruous variety. Or I guess at times sort of stereoscopically resolve them back into one. So as part of the city layer, though some functional equivalent, when they're combined, each of these grids might be, even as combined, may be activated individually, or more likely combined through some kind of protocological equivalence, whereby the cloud layer below and the address layer above connect the two grids within the city layer in ways that are agnostic as to each one's relative durability, history, or character at the city layer itself. So it may be that the ways in which two grids operating at the same time within the city layer may be even ignorant of each other's operations, may be, as we say, stereoscopically resolved at a particular moment to the extent that they are activated by a column initiating from cloud layer or address layer directly above. So it may be that it's the entire stack mechanism itself that actually is the thing that resolves those two grids at the city layer. The operations that result of it doesn't originate at the city layer, but it is staged at the city layer from above and below. So within the stack, glass, steel, power, data may all look the same to the layers above and below. But at the same time, in more specific user relations are arranged by any of the interfacial surfaces of the urban fabric, not only by buildings and roads, but also by energy, hydration, data grids, all of which are open and closed in different sorts of ways. Okay, so from these kinds of larval proto-citizenships are derived not just from formal borders and envelopes, but also from these aggregate, steel, energy, information envelopes crisscrossing grids. Because as we all share them in some common relationship, we all share the plumbing system, we all share the electrical grid system, we all share the road system, which is connected to the other road systems and the other grid systems and so forth and so on and so on. As we all share some relationship to these composite envelopes, by making them and being made by them, that commonality coalesces and automates user positions in relation to one another. The road makes us all drivers, the fiber optic line makes us all callers, the city layer makes us all inhabitants of this composite urban territory. And it suggests that one may be less a political subject of this one particular city, of London or Mumbai or Shanghai, whatever, but of the city, of the globally uneven mesh of amalgamated infrastructures and delaminated jurisdictions. So, and as for humans, the common but uneven relationship to this aggregate meta-urban layer of the stack also means that our political subjectivity is resolved by the city layer as a user of energy, information, and land. The user of the city layer is then pushed towards any number of different outcomes, even if the calculative terms of their resolutions are in some sense held in common. The individual footprint, profile, value within this consolidated index fixes the city layer's control